A true story of Nottoway Plantation. The security cameras at Nottoway Plantation recorded everything that night in May 2025, right up until the flames consumed them. What they captured in those final hours would never be officially released, but I've seen the footage. I was the insurance investigator tasked with determining the cause of the fire that destroyed America's largest antebellum mansion. What I discovered still haunts my dreams. The massive Greek Revival mansion had stood sentinel on the banks of the Mississippi River for 166 years, its 64 rooms and 53,000 square feet of grandeur bearing witness to generations of joy, sorrow, and unspeakable darkness. Built by sugar planter John Hampton Randolph in 1859, it had survived the Civil War, Reconstruction, and countless storms. But nothing could prepare it for what awakened that final night. I arrived at the smoldering ruins 3 days after the fire. The smell of charred wood and melted plastic still hung heavy in the humid Louisiana air. Fire Marshal Thompson met me at what used to be the main entrance, his weathered face grim. "Strangest damn thing I've seen in 30 years, he muttered, kicking at a pile of ash. Fire started simultaneously in 7 different locations throughout the house. No electrical faults, no gas leaks, no accelerants. Just started burning. I'd investigated hundreds of suspicious fires, but Thompson's report made my skin crawl. Spontaneous combustion in multiple locations wasn't just rare, it was virtually impossible. As we walked through the skeletal remains of the mansion, he pointed to various spots where the flames had originated. Kitchen, library, master bedroom, children's nursery, servants' quarters, basement, and the old carriage house, he listed. All started within minutes of each other around 2:17 a.m. Security system went offline immediately after, but we recovered some footage from the backup servers. That's when he told me about the cameras. The plantation had installed a comprehensive security system in 2015 after reports of trespassers and, according to local folklore, increasing paranormal activity. 16 cameras monitored every angle of the property, recording continuously to servers housed in a fireproof vault beneath the mansion. Most of the equipment had melted, but 3 hard drives survived. "You might want to sit down for this," Thompson said as he loaded the first drive into his laptop. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., May 14, 2025. The camera showed the grand ballroom, its crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across the polished floors. Everything appeared normal for exactly 13 minutes. Then, at 12 a.m., the temperature reading in the corner of the screen began to drop. Within seconds, it plummeted from 72 degrees Fahrenheit to 34 degrees Fahrenheit. "Watch the chandelier," Thompson whispered. The massive crystal fixture began to sway, gently at first, then with increasing violence. But there was no wind, no earthquake, no logical explanation. The temperature continued falling 29 degrees Fahrenheit, 25 degrees Fahrenheit, 18 degrees Fahrenheit. My breath would have been visible in that room. Then we saw her. A pale figure materialized in the center of the ballroom. She appeared to be a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing a white dress that seemed to glow with its own light. She stood perfectly still for several seconds, then slowly turned her head toward the camera. Even through the grainy security footage, her eyes were unmistakably black, not brown or dark blue, but absolute void. The child opened her mouth as if screaming, though the cameras recorded no audio. The chandelier's swaying intensified until it crashed to the floor in an explosion of crystal and sparks. The timestamp jumped to 2:15 a.m. 2 minutes of footage were completely missing. The second camera had been positioned to monitor the former carriage house, now used as an event space for weddings and corporate functions. This footage began at 1:30 a.m., showing the empty building bathed in moonlight filtering through tall windows. At 1:45 a.m., a figure appeared at the far end of the building. He was tall and thin, wearing what appeared to be a dark coat and wide-brimmed hat characteristic of the Civil War era. According to plantation records, this matched descriptions of Samuel, an enslaved coachman who had died defending the property during a Union raid in 1863. Witnesses had reported seeing him for over a century, but never this clearly. The figure moved with purpose, walking from window to window as if checking for threats. At each window, he would pause, peer outside, then continue his patrol. Local legends claim Samuel still protected the plantation, maintaining his eternal vigil even in death. But something was different this night. As Samuel reached the final window, he suddenly froze. His head snapped toward the main house, and even through the security footage, his alarm was palpable. He began moving faster, almost frantically, checking and rechecking the windows. Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He looked directly at the camera and shook his head slowly, deliberately. It was a warning. Samuel raised his arm and pointed toward the mansion, his mouth opening in what could only be a scream of terror. The temperature reading dropped again, this time from 75 degrees Fahrenheit to 28 degrees Fahrenheit in less than 30 seconds. The windows began to frost over despite the warm May night. Then Samuel was gone, and the carriage house burst into flames. I spent the next 2 days researching the plantation's history, digging through archives at LSU and the Louisiana State Museum. The official records painted a picture of typical antebellum wealth and splendor, but the personal letters and diaries I uncovered revealed a much darker truth. John Hampton Randolph had built Nottoway as a monument to his success, but beneath the marble floors and silk wallpaper lay a foundation of unspeakable cruelty. His overseer's journals, hidden away in the university's restricted archives, detailed punishments that went beyond even the horrific norms of slavery. The basement of the mansion, one of the fire's points of origin, had served as a private dungeon where Randolph conducted what he called disciplinary measures. Emily Jane Little Randolph's diary entries from 1862 to 1865 were even more disturbing. With her husband away in Texas during the war, she had taken control of the plantation's operations. Her gentle exterior masked a sadistic nature that surpassed even her husband's cruelty. One entry, dated October 13, 1863, described her interrogation of a young house slave accused of stealing bread for her sick brother. The child's defiance required extreme measures. I have moved her to the cellar chambers to contemplate her sins. She insists on her innocence, but I know the truth. They always lie. Tomorrow I shall show her the consequences of dishonesty. The girl was never mentioned again in the diary. But it was Emily's final entry, dated December 24, 1864, that made me understand what I had witnessed on those security cameras. Strange sounds in the night again. Little footsteps in the halls, doors opening by themselves, cold spots that freeze the breath in my lungs. The children speak of a girl in white who visits their rooms, but there are no children here save my own. I fear I am being punished for my necessary disciplines. But surely God understands that inferior races require firm guidance. Surely He approves of my methods. The entry ended there, but a notation in different handwriting, likely a servant's, had been added in the margin. Mrs. Emily found dead in the cellar on Christmas morning. Door was locked from inside. No key. Face frozen in terror, eyes black as coal. Doctor said her heart stopped from fright. We know better. The girl in white finally had her justice. I tracked down Marcus Williams, the security guard who had been on duty the night of the fire. He'd been employed at Nottoway for 8 years and had experienced what he called minor incidents before: doors slamming, cold drafts, the occasional shadow in his peripheral vision. But nothing had prepared him for his final shift. We met at a diner in White Castle, and I could see the haunted look in his eyes before he even began speaking. I knew something was wrong the moment my shift started, Marcus said, stirring his coffee with shaking hands. Temperature kept fluctuating on the monitors, showing impossible readings. 50 degrees in the kitchen, 90 in the library, 32 in the ballroom. I figured it was system malfunction, but then I started hearing the bells. According to plantation lore, the ringing of bells had always been associated with Samuel's ghost. In life, he had used a small brass bell to signal the arrival of carriages or to alert the family to potential threats. Started around midnight, Marcus continued. Just one bell at first, coming from the direction of the carriage house. Then more bells, different tones, like a whole chorus of them. I checked the cameras, but couldn't see anything unusual. That's when I decided to do a physical patrol. Marcus had worked security for years and prided himself on being rational and fearless. But as he approached the main house that night, every instinct screamed at him to run. The front door was standing wide open. I knew I'd locked it personally at 11 p.m. I always double-check everything. But there it was, hanging open like an invitation. The motion sensors should have triggered, but nothing. Just silence and that open door. He drew his flashlight and entered the mansion, following standard protocol for checking every room. The grand staircase creaked under his weight, and the beam of his light seemed to dim as he climbed to the second floor. Made it to the master bedroom first. Door was closed, but I could hear something inside. Sounded like a woman crying, real soft and pitiful. I knocked and announced myself, thinking maybe a guest had gotten locked in somehow. The crying stopped immediately. Marcus tried the door handle and found it unlocked. The room was empty, but the temperature was Arctic. His breath formed clouds as he swept the room with his flashlight, finding nothing but period furniture and portraits of the Randolph family. That's when I saw the bed, he whispered. The covers were pulled back, and there was an impression in the mattress like someone had been lying there. Still warm, too. I put my hand on it, and it was definitely body temperature, maybe warmer. As he turned to leave, the crying resumed, but now it seemed to come from multiple voices, filling the room with a chorus of anguish. I got out of there fast, headed for the children's nursery to continue my rounds. But the hallway had changed somehow. Seemed longer, darker. Portraits on the walls looked different, like the eyes were following me. And it was so cold my flashlight beam was refracting through ice crystals in the air. The nursery had been preserved exactly as it appeared in 1859, complete with antique toys, small beds, and a rocking horse that generations of Randolph children had played with. It was also where the security cameras had captured some of the most disturbing footage. Marcus reached the nursery door at 1:52 a.m. according to his radio logs. The room was dark, but his flashlight revealed something that shouldn't have been possible: the rocking horse was moving. Not fast, just gently back and forth like someone was riding it, Marcus recalled. I stood in the doorway watching, trying to make sense of it. No air currents, no vibrations from the floor, nothing that could explain the movement. Then I heard the giggling. Children's laughter echoed through the nursery, but it was wrong, somehow too high-pitched, lasting too long, with an underlying tone of malice that made his skin crawl. I called out, asked if anyone was there. The giggling stopped, and the rocking horse slowed to a stop. Then I heard footsteps, little bare feet running across the wooden floor. But I couldn't see anyone. Marcus swept the room with his flashlight, checking behind furniture and in the corners. The nursery appeared empty, but the temperature continued to drop until frost began forming on the windows. That's when I saw her reflection. In the mirror above the antique dresser, Marcus glimpsed a little girl in a white nightgown. She was standing directly behind him, close enough that he should have felt her presence. When he spun around, nothing was there. But the mirror still showed her image, and now she was smiling. Her teeth were wrong, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. Too sharp, too many of them. And her eyes. God, her eyes were completely black. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, and I could see down her throat. It just went on forever, like looking into a well. The little girl in the mirror raised her hand and pointed at Marcus. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that ice began forming on his uniform. His radio crackled with static, and through the white noise, he heard a voice. You don't belong here. That's when Marcus ran. Against all common sense and training, Marcus had one more location to check: the basement. The plantation's lower level housed the old wine cellar, storage rooms, and what the tour guides euphemistically called service areas. But based on my research, I knew it had served a much darker purpose. Marcus reached the basement stairs at 2:10 a.m. His flashlight was dimming despite fresh batteries, and the temperature readings on his equipment showed impossible fluctuations from below freezing to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit within seconds. The stairs down to the basement felt longer than usual, Marcus remembered. Like they kept going and going. I counted 30 steps when there should have been only 15. And with each step, it got colder and darker. The basement's stone walls seemed to absorb his flashlight beam, creating pockets of impenetrable shadow that moved independently of any light source. Marcus could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness, though the plantation's basement had been dry for decades. Made it to the bottom and started checking the storage rooms. First few were normal old furniture, boxes of documents, that kind of thing. But when I got to the room at the far end, the one they kept locked during tours, Marcus's voice trailed off, and he stared into his coffee cup for nearly a minute before continuing. The door was standing open. Had 3 deadbolts on it normally, all locked tight. But that night, it was just open. And there was light coming from inside, even though there wasn't supposed to be any electricity down there. Against every instinct screaming at him to flee, Marcus approached the open door. The light inside wasn't electric, it was the cold, blue-white glow of phosphorescence, like deep-sea creatures or rotting wood. The room beyond was larger than it should have been, with stone walls that disappeared into shadow above. Ancient iron rings were embedded in the walls at various heights, and dark stains covered the floor despite decades of cleaning. But it was the room's occupant that made Marcus's blood freeze. There was a woman standing in the center of the room. Tall, wearing a long dress from the Civil War period. Her back was to me, but I could see she was looking down at something. As I got closer, I realized she was standing over a small form on the floor. The woman was Emily Randolph. Marcus was certain of it from the portraits he'd seen throughout the house. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged despite being over 160 years dead, and her dress showed no signs of decay. But when she slowly turned to face him, Marcus understood that death had not been kind to the plantation's former mistress. Her face was wrong. Like it had been frozen in the moment of her death, mouth open in a scream, eyes wide with terror. But the worst part was that she recognized me. She looked right at me and smiled, and when she did, I could see that her teeth had been filed to points. At Emily's feet lay the body of a young girl in a white nightgown, the same child Marcus had seen in the nursery mirror. But unlike Emily, the girl was moving. She raised her head and looked at Marcus with those same black eyes. "He shouldn't be here," the girl said, her voice echoing strangely in the stone chamber. "This is family business." Emily nodded and began walking toward Marcus. With each step, her appearance grew more decayed, skin turning gray and mottled, hair falling out in patches, dress rotting away to reveal bones underneath. "You've seen too much," Emily whispered, her voice like autumn leaves scraping across concrete. "You'll have to stay." That's when Marcus broke protocol and ran for his life. Marcus made it to his security station and immediately called 911, but the fire had already begun. As he spoke to the dispatcher, alarms started blaring throughout the mansion. The security monitors showed flames erupting simultaneously in 7 locations, the exact same rooms where he had encountered supernatural activity. It wasn't a normal fire, Marcus insisted. Flames were blue and white, moving in patterns that didn't make sense. They flowed upward like liquid, and the smoke formed shapes, faces, reaching hands, things that couldn't be coincidental. The 911 recording, which I obtained through official channels, captured Marcus's terrified voice describing impossible phenomena. "The whole place is burning, but the fire's moving wrong. It's climbing the walls in spirals, and I swear I can see people in the flames. Oh God, there's someone in the window of the master bedroom, but the room's completely engulfed. She's waving at me? She's actually waving." The call cut off abruptly when the communication equipment melted. Fire trucks arrived within 12 minutes, but the mansion was already beyond saving. Chief Rodriguez, who commanded the response, later told me that his men reported several disturbing anomalies during the firefight. Water had no effect on certain sections of the fire, Rodriguez explained. "We'd hit it with thousands of gallons, and the flames would just dance around the spray like it wasn't even there. And the smoke. It moved against the wind, forming patterns that looked almost deliberate." Several firefighters claimed to see figures moving through the flames, people who should have been consumed instantly but appeared to walk unharmed through the inferno. One veteran firefighter, a 20-year veteran named Sullivan, was so shaken by what he witnessed that he retired the following week. "I've fought fires in chemical plants, oil refineries, high-rises with people trapped inside," Sullivan told me. "Never seen anything like Nottoway. The fire was alive somehow, making choices about what to burn and what to spare. And the sounds coming from inside weren't just wood cracking and glass breaking. There were voices, lots of them, some screaming and some laughing. The mansion burned for 6 hours, until there was nothing left but the stone foundation and a few brick chimneys. The temperature of the flames was measured at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, in some areas hot enough to melt steel, yet some wooden artifacts in the basement survived completely unscathed. Among the items that inexplicably escaped damage was Emily Randolph's diary. The third and final security drive contained the most disturbing footage. This camera had been positioned in the mansion's grand central hallway, providing a view of the main staircase and several doorways. The timestamp began at 2:15 a.m., exactly when the other cameras had gone offline. For the first 2 minutes, the hallway appeared normal. Then the temperature began to drop, and figures started emerging from the various doorways. First came the children's 7 or 8 young ghosts in nightgowns and period clothing, ranging in age from perhaps 5 to 15. They moved silently into the hallway and formed a circle around the base of the grand staircase. Their faces were pale and gaunt, with those same black eyes I'd seen in previous footage. Next came the adults, men and women in the clothing of house slaves, field workers, and overseers. They filled the hallway until it was crowded with spectral figures, all standing motionless and facing the staircase. At 2:17 a.m., Emily Randolph appeared at the top of the stairs. She descended slowly, regally, as if making a grand entrance at a ball. But with each step, her appearance deteriorated. By the time she reached the bottom, she was little more than a skeleton in a decaying dress, her jaw hanging open in an eternal scream. The assembled ghosts began to move, closing in around Emily in an ever-tightening circle. The temperature reading showed 15 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that frost was forming on the camera lens. Then something extraordinary happened. The little girl in white, the one Marcus had seen in the nursery, stepped forward from the crowd. She was no longer the terrifying specter from previous footage, but appeared as she must have in life, a beautiful child with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She spoke, and though there was no audio, I could read her lips clearly. "It's time." Emily Randolph tried to flee, but the crowd of spirits surrounded her completely. What happened next was obscured by a sudden flash of light that whited out the camera for several seconds. When the image cleared, Emily was gone. The other spirits remained for a few moments longer, and I noticed something that made my hands shake as I watched the footage. They were all smiling, not the malicious grins of vengeful ghosts, but expressions of profound relief and peace. One by one, they faded away until only the little girl remained. She looked directly into the camera and nodded once, as if acknowledging an observer she knew would someday watch this recording. Then she, too, was gone, and the flames began. My investigation into the Nottoway fire officially concluded with a finding of undetermined origin, but I knew the truth. The mansion hadn't burned due to electrical failure or human negligence. It had been consumed by justice delayed for over a century and a half. Further research into parish records revealed the extent of Emily Randolph's crimes. Between 1862 and 1864, at least 12 enslaved children had disappeared from the plantation. Official records listed them as runaways, but their bodies were never found, and there were no reports of them reaching Union lines or free territories. A ground-penetrating radar survey conducted after the fire revealed anomalies beneath the basement floor, areas where the soil had been disturbed and never properly settled. The state archaeologist's office has sealed the findings pending a formal investigation, but I know what they'll find. The little girl in white wasn't just any spirit. She was the first of Emily's victims, a house slave named Sarah who had been only 8 years old when she was murdered for the crime of taking bread for her hungry siblings. For 161 years, Sarah had gathered the souls of other children who had suffered similar fates, waiting for the moment when they could finally achieve justice. The fire wasn't destruction, it was purification. The mansion that had witnessed so much cruelty and pain needed to be cleansed completely before its victims could find peace. Today, the Nottoway site remains empty except for the foundation stones and a historical marker that makes no mention of the paranormal events that preceded its destruction. The state has classified the property as archaeologically sensitive, preventing any immediate reconstruction efforts. But locals report that the area is different now. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the plantation for generations has lifted. Birds sing in the ancient oak trees again, and the Mississippi River seems to flow more peacefully past the ruins. Marcus Williams left Louisiana immediately after the fire and now works security at a shopping mall in Ohio. He still has nightmares, but they're different now. Instead of terror, he dreams of children playing in fields of white flowers, their laughter pure and joyful. The insurance company ultimately paid the claim without challenge, though they'll never know the real reason I recommended approval. How do you explain in an official report that a fire was started by the collective will of murdered children seeking justice for crimes committed over a century ago? Sometimes late at night, when I'm alone in my office reviewing case files, I wonder about other plantations, other grand homes built on foundations of suffering. How many still harbor secrets in their basements and attics? How many restless spirits wait for their own moment of reckoning? The security footage from Nottoway's final night was officially classified and sealed, but copies exist. I've watched it hundreds of times, and each viewing reveals new details, new faces in the crowd of spirits, new evidence of the horrors that transpired within those walls. But I always stop watching before the end. There's something in that final moment, when little Sarah looks into the camera, that I'm not ready to confront. It's the look of a child who has carried the weight of justice for over a century, finally ready to rest. The Nottoway Plantation is gone, consumed by flames that burned hotter than any earthly fire. But in its destruction, peace was finally achieved, not just for the spirits who had haunted its halls, but for all those who suffered within its walls. Some stories end with hauntings. This one ends with healing. But on quiet nights, when the Mississippi fog rolls in thick and white, residents of White Castle sometimes report seeing children playing in the ruins, children who laugh with pure joy and vanish with the morning mist, finally free to rest in eternal peace.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share it with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey.